Well, good morning, my friends. So here's some thoughts for this day. Hopefully it encourages you and kind of keeps you company during the day. So one of my favorite scriptures in the Old Testament is when Moses has his encounter with God on the mountain, and he's there for 40 days, and basically says, I need to see your glory. I want to see your glory. And God says to him, my presence will go with you. And then Moses' response is really incredible. He says, if your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here, for how will any of the peoples know that we are any different? The difference between the people of Israel and the foreign people was the presence of God. And in the same way, nowadays, it's the same thing. The difference between us as Christians and people who are not Christians is the presence of God that's with us. It's not our theology. It's not our great teaching. It's not the miracles. It's not all the way we live. It's actually the presence of God that makes the difference. And I'd like to encourage you with the following. The presence of God is not some ether that floats out there somewhere out in outer space. It's not some force. It's not some power. It's a very substantial thing. Presence of God, the glory of God, is actually substantial. So substantial that we read in the New Testament that when this woman who was bleeding for 12 years came to Jesus and touched the hem of his garment, just his cloak, she was radically healed. As Jesus didn't pray for her, he didn't lay hands on her. His garments, his clothes were so saturated with the presence of God, with the power of God, that her touching the garments made the difference. In the same way, we know that the disciples were able to do this too, because Peter, who was one of the disciples of Jesus, walked around and people would bring their sick so that his shadow would touch them. Just the reflection, the shadow would touch them and they would get radically healed. Now we know it's not his shadow that did it. It's the very presence, the substantial presence of God that was on Peter. And in the same way, it was so substantial that handkerchiefs and tissues would be taken and they would be so saturated with the very presence of God through Peter that people would get healed just by their handkerchiefs. And I think we've lost some of that understanding and some of the greatness of the presence of God that is substantial. And I think one of the things we should be doing is getting back to becoming so intimate with God and so saturated with his presence and so saturated with his glory that is what makes the difference. That is what differentiates us from other people. Not our great theology, not even the way we love other people, although that's critical, but actually the very presence of God, that people come around us and say, surely God is among you, surely God is on you. The presence of God is not, it's not something theoretical, it's very practical and it's extremely substantial. And so I pray that right now, the presence of God, the glory of God would come upon you and that your day would never be the same.